I'm Dr. Robert K. Stolting. The date is July 20th, 2006. Today I am in St. Louis, Missouri to interview Dr. William D. Owens. Dr. Owens has a very distinguished and long career in academic anesthesiology, and it's my privilege today, Bill, to be speaking with you. Now, Bill and I have been friends for more than 30 years, both colleagues and personal friends, so I know that you grew up in Missouri. Can you tell us about your early childhood, Bill?
Yes, Bob. I grew up in a little town about 65 miles southwest of St. Louis, a town called Gerald, that had 376 people prior to my leaving. Then it was 375. But it was a wonderful small town for family life and for really being able to be an individual who could pretty well do what you wanted. It was hard to get into trouble.
Eventually you went off to school and went to Westminster College. Can you tell us how you happened to select that school?
Well, there's two reasons, really. My brother was a student at Westminster College, so I had visited it a few times. And the other is, and probably more importantly, was that they gave me a scholarship. And that sort of sealed the deal, so to speak, in getting me to go to Westminster.
After that, it was medical school, Bill. Where did you decide to go to medical school?
Well, I went to school, for medical school, I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and University of Michigan. That was a very fortuitous event, although I really didn't set out originally to have that as my medical school. Dr. Cameron Day, who was a pre-medical advisor at Westminster College, told me I should go to Tulane University Medical School, and I wanted to go to University of Minnesota, but I was given a third school. I could choose a third school to have my letters sent to, and I chose Michigan, and as events worked out, that's where I wound up going.
Somewhere along the line you met Pat, your wife. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I met Pat actually while I was a student at the University of Michigan. She was teaching in a hospital school, that is a school for hospitalized children that the Kiwanis clubs of Michigan paid for. And basically what they did was to tutor children who were hospitalized to keep them up to date with their home school lessons and tests and so on.
You were still at the University of Michigan at that time?
Yes, I was. We met in 1964, early in 1964, and we were married the last part of 1964 at the University of Michigan.
So there's no truth in the rumor that you went to the University of Michigan on a football scholarship?
Oh no, not at all. I've never played football in my life.
I know you and Pat have a wonderful family. Can you tell us about your children?
Yes, I certainly am very proud of our three children. Pamela is the oldest. She has got a PhD in health policy research and currently works for the Agency for Health Quality and Research in Washington, D.C. Her husband, Grant, is a career Army officer. Has about another year and a half, 2 years to go in terms of his commitment. My son David is currently a cardiology fellow at the University of Washington in Seattle. And my third child, Susan, is a physical therapist who lives here in St. Louis and married. And the two girls have a total of 3 sons together, 2 from Pam and 1 from Susie. And so Pat and I are blessed with 3 grandsons at the moment.
Now, eventually, postgraduate training came into the picture. Tell me about how you selected or entered into anesthesiology.
Well, that's actually fairly easy. You think back to the mid-1960s, things were beginning to heat up in the southern Pacific area, southern Asia area, i.e. Vietnam. And I had an obligation to spend some time on active duty with the Navy after my internship. Well, the Navy gave me my choice between a landing craft and a Tonkin Gulf, where I could go into anesthesia. So I had no experience with anesthesia at that time. I didn't know what it was really about, but I decided it's got to be better than a landing craft and a Tonkin Gulf.
Is this the OJT program in anesthesiology in the
Yes,
Navy?
it is. The OJT program was very, very successful. There were 11 of us the first year, and I think of those 11, I believe 9 people went into anesthesiology. I believe the next year there were 12 or 13, and something like 9 of those went into anesthesiology as a career.
Now, I know you eventually selected MGH, Massachusetts General Hospital, for your residency training. Tell me how that came to be.
Well, with my time in the Navy, I had a lot of experience administering anesthesia for the fairly routine cases in an operating room, plus a lot of trauma. What I did not have any experience at was in cardiac anesthesia, nor did I have much experience in terms of critical care medicine. At that time, that is in 1968, when I was looking for a place to take my training, the predominant place in the United States for training in cardiac and in critical care was the Mass General. And so I thought I would probably put that as my #1 choice. I then went to a meeting in Chicago as the Midwest Anesthesia Conference, and I happened to be sitting in a restaurant in the Hilton Hotel. I think it was the Conrad Hilton. And I was having breakfast when I was joined by an elder statesman in anesthesia, although he wasn't an elder statesman at that time. But it was Bill Hamilton, and who was just leaving the University of Iowa and going to University of California, San Francisco. And I got to talking with him, and I told him my background and what I was interested in, and he said, well, you know, what you really should do is go to the Mass General for your training. So that just solidified my decision.
Who was the head of anesthesia at MGH at that time?
Well, when I applied, it was Dr. Henry K. Beecher. When I actually arrived there, September 1, 1969, which was my starting date, was also the starting date of Richard J. Kitts as the chief of anesthesiology at the Mass General.
What did you do after you finished your training then in Boston?
Well, I stayed for 1 year on the staff at the Mass General. During that time, I looked for opportunities elsewhere, primarily in the Midwest. I wanted to stay in academic medicine, and I looked at places like University of Michigan, my alma mater. I looked at University of Missouri, University of Wisconsin. Then Ron Stevens and Washington University entered the picture. And Ron had just about 2 years previously started a department of anesthesiology at Washington University, and was just in the throes of beginning to build a department. And I thought my opportunities there would be superb, and I also thought that Ron Stevens would be an excellent mentor, both of which turned out to be true.
I know you and Ron have had a long friendship. Would you say Ron was the reason you came back to St. Louis and Washington University?
He was a big part of it. I came back to St. Louis partly because of family reasons, and my wife, Pat, and I wanted to get back to the Midwest. But then choosing Washington University, yes, Ron was very much the reason for that.
I also know, Bill, that the surgery department at WashU is a very strong department. How did that influence the anesthesia department?
Well, it was exceedingly strong surgery department, and that was a major impediment for Dr. Stephen and later for me at developing a strong anesthesiology department. There was a nurse anesthesia school that was run by Barnes Hospital, and then there was the Washington University Department of Anesthesiology, which was primarily physicians, or not primarily, it was totally physicians. As we built the physician staff, we could do more and more of the anesthetics, but we were not supervising the nurse anesthetists. They were totally separate from us, and they worked under the direction of the surgeons. Well, you can imagine what that was like in the operating rooms if we didn't think that someone was prepared to undergo anesthesia at that time, needed a further workup or something. The surgeons would just turn and beckon to a nurse anesthetist, and there would be an anesthetic administered. So it was a tightrope that Ron had to walk every day.
I know that shortly after your arrival that the intensive care unit played a big role in your contributions. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yes. Ron Stephen thought that one of the ways that the anesthesia department could develop within the hospital setting here at Barnes Hospital and Washington University was to become involved in, first of all, respiratory therapy and then critical care. So the opportunity arose in 1976 for a medical director of respiratory therapy at Barnes Hospital, something they had never had before. And Ron wanted to put my name up for that, and I agreed to it. I was chosen to be that medical director, and in that position, I was frequently consulted to take care of patients who were ventilator dependent in the intensive care unit. One thing led to another, and before long I was spending most of my time in the surgical intensive care unit, taking care of primarily ventilator dependent patients, but also, since I was there, the surgeons would also frequently have me take care of other problems that the patients were having too.
Did you have any other positions at Barnes Hospital in addition to the intensive care unit in your early career?
Well, I eventually became the co-medical director of the surgical intensive care unit, and that was kind of strange when Dr. Walter Ballinger, who was the chairman of surgery, told me that he did not want me in the surgical intensive care unit, and I said that I would be happy to stay out of that unit if his surgeons wouldn't consult me with patients, but I thought obligated to be there once they consulted. Dr. Ballinger said, well, he was going to recruit a surgeon and was going to run that unit, and I was going to be out. Well, he did recruit a surgeon, and that surgeon refused to come unless I was named the co-medical director. So I came up with that title shortly thereafter. I was then, I guess because of my exposure to a lot of the other physicians in other departments, I also wound up as the vice president of medical staff at Barnes Hospital. And then, later on, much later on, I wound up as the chairman of anesthesiology.
You've touched on this a bit, but what was the relationship between physician and nurse anesthesia?
Well, I would say it was not very good in the 70s. Ron Stephen came here with the promise that eventually he would be able to take over the nurse anesthetist and it will all be one department. That was a threat to the nurse anesthetist, and that was also a threat to the bottom line of Barnes Hospital, and they never reached an agreement on that. The working relationship as an individual anesthesiologist and an individual nurse anesthetist, they worked well together, but we never really supervised the nurse anesthetist. They were independent of the anesthesiologist. And that changed in 1983 when I was offered the position of chairman of anesthesiology. One of my stipulations was that that had to all be one department. And after much negotiations involving not only myself and the president of Barnes Hospital, but also the dean and the vice chancellor at Washington University, finally reached agreement where the nurse anesthetist would be merged into the Department of Anesthesiology at Washington University. That occurred in October of 1983, and that has certainly been true ever since.
Was that a named chair when you became chair of the department?
Yes, it was the Henry Mallinckrodt chair. That chair was one of the early ones in anesthesiology in this country. It was initially funded, oh gollies, I think in the late 1940s, early 50s, but it was not occupied initially until the 1960s. And it does not stipulate that it must be the chair, but it does stipulate that it's got to be to a senior anesthesiologist.
Did the hospital offer you any incentives as far as being chair to the department?
Well, the only incentive the hospital offered was that they were finally willing to give up control of the nurse anesthetist. And partial control of the operating room schedule. The medical school, on the other hand, was much more generous. I had requested some seed money to get the department started in research, and I had requested some square footage and laboratory space. And I would say that they were very, very generous, because at the time we were given 10,000 square feet of space and $2,500,000 in seed money to get the department off and running in terms of basic science research.
Now, was this the anesthesia research unit?
Yes, yes.
Did the nurse anesthesia group of the hospital join with the university group physicians after you became chair?
Actually, that occurred when I was acting chair, because I wouldn't accept the position until that had taken place. But yes, the nurse anesthetists were merged into, and we took total responsibility then for the nurse anesthesia care that they gave. We directly supervised the nurse anesthetists after that.
What effect on morale did this have?
Most of the nurse anesthetists accepted that very well. There were, I think, 3 or 4 who decided that they no longer wanted to work at this institution. Among the anesthesiologists, that was very highly welcomed until they realized just how much work there was. And yes, there were some difficult times that the anesthesiologists went through when they had to supervise nurse anesthetists plus teach residents at the same time.
Now, you mentioned the anesthesia research unit. I know you sponsored some young anesthesiologists in their early research careers. What did you do that was unique and attractive to them?
Well, I don't know that it was that unique. Manny Papper probably was one of the first ones to start doing what we accomplished here, which was to take a young anesthesiologist and give them basic science training. During that time, they had some clinical commitment, but not a full clinical load. And after 2 or 3 years working in a basic science laboratory in one of the basic science departments, we would then bring them back into the anesthesia research unit, and they had a joint appointment with that basic science department. So that, as an example, Alex Evers was recruited from the Mass General, and he spent 3 years with Dr. Philip Needleman in pharmacology, and then developed his own independent laboratory in the anesthesiology research unit. Richard Hotchkiss was recruited from the Mass General, Walter Boyle from the University of California, Davis, in much the same circumstances. And all 3 of them now have well-funded, NIH-funded laboratories. Now, there were some failures along the line, too. I don't mean to tell you that everybody that we sponsored in this basic science research effort it turned out to be a very fruitful basic science investigator. But overall, I would say that it's been a very successful program.
I've always said, Bill, that you were a natural-born politician. Were you involved in local politics early in your career?
Well, I guess I was brought up with politics. My father was a politician who rose to the level as a state senator. But both my brother and I have wound up being in politics in our respective professions. Yes, I very early was involved with the St. Louis Society of Anesthesiologists and the Missouri Society of Anesthesiologists. I became involved with the American Society of Anesthesiologists through a fellow faculty member here at Washington University. His name was James Feltz. And at the time, Jim was Vice Speaker of the House of Delegates, later Speaker of the House of Delegates. And Jim and I commuted 3-4 mornings a week together, and so I certainly was primed by him to become involved in the governance of the ASA. So yes, I started very early in terms of anesthesiology politics.
About this time in your career, the American Board of Anesthesiology came along. Can you tell us about your membership on the board of directors of the ABA?
The ABA was one of the highlights of my career. As you well know, Bob, you were already on the ABA when I was selected. That is 12 years of very meaningful decision making that can influence the direction of the specialty of anesthesiology for years. And it's a responsibility which anyone on the board does not take very lightly. It also opens up lots of opportunities to broaden the mind in the sense of how to train and educate residents, how to work towards lifelong learning that I think is unexcelled, except by being involved in the American Board of Anesthesiology. Along with that, during my time on the board was the start of the American Board, the ABA's sub-certification in pain management and later pain medicine. That, I believe, was one of the big items that happened during my time there. Another one was recertification. A lot of discussion early in my time on the board about recertification, and the 12 members eventually went along with that. Critical care medicine as a subspecialty was just really evolving about the time that I went on, even though, it was approved well before I went on the board in the sense of really maturing. It was during that time. And so I was very fortunate to be surrounded by very futuristic individuals who helped lead this specialty and who are still big leaders in the specialty.
I think at the same time you were also on the Residency Review Committee.
That I was. I was one of the representatives from the ABA to the Residency Review Committee. That experience is certainly one that is rewarding in some ways. It was less than rewarding in others. When we were able to accomplish things, I thought it was very rewarding. When there were times that you tried to advance the specialty through changing some training methodologies or training requirements, and you would be stymied by the American College of Graduate Medical Education, both of them saying, no, you can't do that, and yet they were not the ones who knew what our specialty needed, and that was very frustrating.
All this time, tell me what was happening with anesthesiology at Washington University in the 80s.
Well, the department was really maturing. When I became chairman in 1984, backing up, when I became acting chairman in 1982, we had only 21 faculty members. That really grew in the 1980s. It went up to I think a peak of 56 or 57 faculty members in about 1992. The residency program grew from 18 residents to a maximum, I think we hit 55 in 1991. So there was a tremendous growth in physician-provided anesthesiology at Barnes Hospital and at Washington University. And along with that was more and more control of critical care medicine, particularly in the cardiac surgery intensive care unit and in the surgical intensive care unit. And then in our basic science endeavors, we went, as I said earlier, from no laboratory space to having 10,000 square feet that was fully equipped and filled. When in 1992, we were up to $5 million in NIH funds, I believe, which was quite significant, going from zero to that in essentially 10 years. And so we think that this was a very strong era for anesthesiology at Washington University.
In addition to being chair, you had some clinical responsibilities as well.
Yes, while I was chair, I continued as the co-medical director in the surgical intensive care unit, and I was responsible for rounds there for nine out of 12 months of the year. I also, when I would get done with morning rounds, I would come down to the operating rooms and try to help get cases started, and where some faculty members were sort of swamped with too much to be done in a short period of time. So yes, I was very involved clinically.
What about the nurse anesthesia school during this time?
Well, the first thing we did was to stop taking students twice a year, and we cut it in half and only took students once a year. And then in the late 1980s, we totally got rid of the school from Barnes Hospital / Washington University, and it was moved to Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. We were still a primary teaching hospital, but we were no longer responsible for the recruiting of students or the overall responsibility for the training of those students. And that later, after my time as chairman, that school was actually stopped. As
chair, you have many colleagues, other chairs. How did you get along with the other chairs at WashU?
Overall, reasonably well. I don't mind saying that I really had a lot of difficulties with the chairman of surgery, which was unfortunate, because we really do have to work together to be a success. And Dr. Sam Wells and I did not see eye to eye on numerous occasions, primarily revolving around whether or not anesthesiology was trying to exert too much control over surgeons' operating times, their care of patients in the critical care unit, etc. So Dr. Wells and I had many a disagreement, and which led to my eventual resignation as a chairman. I figured that after a number of years of, excuse my way of saying this, but of butting my head against the wall, I decided I had had enough and it was time for somebody else to take over.
What year was that?
1992.
When did you decide to pursue national politics in the American Society of Anesthesiologists?
I can remember the occasion very well, Bob. I can't remember the date. Bill Jensen, who was the Speaker of the House of Delegates of the ASA, was already announced as a potential candidate for president of ASA, or for first vice president of ASA. And Bill died suddenly, totally unexpectedly. And at the next board meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, the Midwest caucus was having a meeting and we were talking about this loss of Bill, not only from the standpoint of the personal loss of Bill Jensen, but also the loss of what this meant to the Midwest and the Midwest caucus. And some names were tossed out as the possible individuals that might fill in this slot. And I remember very, very well of my saying, I think the right guy is here, it's Bob Stolting. And you at that time said that you were not really willing to do it at that time. And so I said, well, I will. And that's really the genesis of where and when that, not when, because I can't remember the year that was, but it must have been about 1993, 1994, 1995, something like that.
Well, thank you for the flattering bit of memory. What would you view as some of the important issues, Bill, during your tenure as president of the ASA?
Well, what I thought was going to be an agenda for me as a president of ASA never came to be, because within weeks after I was elected president of ASA, there was a turmoil out of Washington, D.C. related to, at that time, HCFA, or Medicare no longer requiring physician supervision of nurse anesthetists. And from the standpoint of patient safety, that just doesn't make any sense. And most of the evidence that is out there, it would indicate that that doesn't make any sense. And so that began a year of many trips to Washington, many meetings with representatives and senators and people from HCFA to try and get the HCFA to rescind the rule. Well, we never got them to rescind the rule that year. Eventually it was modified, but that year we at least got them to delay it and to consider it. And fortunately I was followed by some presidents of ASA who were very strong in terms of their arguments as well. And eventually that rule was modified to a great extent. But that turned out to be the major issue. I'm sorry that that's the major issue, because there were a lot of things which we could have been spending time on related to the advancement of anesthesiology as a specialty of medicine, where in fact we didn't waste, but we spent a lot of our time and we spent a lot of our money on this one rule, proposed rule from HCFA.
Well, tell me about life after being president of the ASA.
Well, I came back to being a full-time faculty member at Washington University, having made friends all over the United States and in many parts of the world. And I was, to a certain extent, what being a president of ASA and then in the following year not being, it's like jumping off a cliff almost. It's suddenly you miss those frequent encounters with friends. You miss those phone calls and the advice that you get from all of the people that you've interacted with over the years. So from a very active lifestyle, it suddenly becomes a very non-active lifestyle. One thing it did not cure, though, was my wife's and my love for travel, and to this day we continue to travel. Getting back to the professional side of things, though, I did come back and to the operating room area of the Washington University / Barnes Hospital. And I spent my remaining clinical years primarily in head and neck anesthesia, which is where I started in 1973. So I made a full circle.
Well, eventually all good academic careers seem to come to an end. Did you actually retire?
I did. I retired officially August the 30th, 2004. I believe that's right, yes. My actual last case in the operating rooms, though, was on something like August 7th or 8th. And I just never bothered to tell anyone other than my chief that I was going to be retiring at the end of the month. So my last day in the OR, I just kind of walked out and silently disappeared.
Well, I wouldn't say disappeared, but what have you done to occupy your time? You mentioned traveling.
I do quite a bit of traveling. I do some work with the Anesthesia Foundation, the foundation that provides loan funds for needy residents. I spend time with my grandkids whenever I can. And really, when I really can come up with some spare time, I do a little woodworking, building simple furniture, not major casework or cabinetry or that kind of thing. But I do like building things with my hands, and I've got a little shop that I've set up, and when I have the time, I try to do something there.
I sense a sincere pride in the professional career that you've had. Would you say it's been a fulfilling professional career?
I'd say it's been exceedingly rewarding. I've had wonderful opportunities to develop friendships, to develop relationships with individuals that have served as mentors. I just have so many people to be thankful for the mentoring that they gave me when I was young. And today I like to think that I'm still available to help young people too. It's one of the reasons I still have an office in the department, and I try to come to conferences. I try to spend some time with the residents and giving them an opportunity to discuss their future and where the specialty might be going in the future.
Well, Bill, that concludes everything I wanted to answer or ask you about your career. I thank you for sharing your thoughts and memories with us, and I know that all of us in anesthesia thank you for all your contributions to our specialty.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you for the opportunity of making this tape.